Hello and welcome back. This is lecture 5. We are in the last module and this is the last lecture of the last module. So, basically we have reached the end of the course and it is a good time to take a recap and just summarize whatever we have learned so far. So, that is what we will do in this lecture and then we will be completing the course. So, module 1 we had 12 modules in this course. Module 1 we had a detailed discussion on the evolution of human language, as in evolution of human language we have discussed both in terms of the evolution as well as evolution of language through generations. So, both were discussed in the first module. While discussing that, we have looked at various kind of markers, started with the biological marker, as in how various biological factors are probably responsible for humans for having language, for humans being able to speak. So, while looking at the biological markers, we discussed about different kinds of theoretical positions and different kinds of techniques that are used for arriving at the conclusions that we did. So, we talked about the homologous and the analogous comparisons across various species, whether it is higher primate like our close cousins or other kinds of animals who seem to have some kind of a communication system. So, all of that we discussed and then we talked about certain biological factors which are which seem to be human specific, but of late we have more data in the domain and we now know that those many of those biological features are actually present in other animals too. So, for example, we started our discussion with FOXP2 gene. So, that takes us to the realm of genetics and how probably there was a mutation or there was a single gene that is responsible for humans to be able to speak. So, the discovery of FOXP2 was taken as a very important milestone in the entire debate about language evolution. Now, while initially it was believed that FOXP2 is this is a human specific gene and any kind of problem with that will result into language disorder. We discussed specific language impairment with respect to that. And we also discussed that later findings show that Neanderthals probably also had a version of FOXP2. And then there are many other speculations as well, many other pointers that probably many other higher primates also did. So, FOXP2 probably is not the only thing which resulted in us in speaking. And then we talked about the brain structure. Brain structure as in the what are those properties in the human brain that are responsible, that probably are responsible for evolving language in humans. So, there is this Broca's area, Wernicke's area and so on and so forth. And then we also discussed that how other primates also do have some similar brain regions, but the same region has different functions for other animals. So, in some primates, in some higher primates it is used for complex gestures, whereas for us it is used for language, production of language. So, these are the various things, and then also we talked about the larynx. In case of humans, it is our vocal tract is specifically designed in order to enable us to be able to speak. And then we of course discussed various theories within the larger biological domain. And we also saw we discussed the contribution of a large number of scholars in this, and also we saw that some of the biological factors which initially were thought to be human specific was also there among the ancient our ancient predecessors. Some various kinds of ancient animals also had some of those. So, the idea that was proposed was by some of the scholars is that those organs have been, those brain parts, those neural parts have been repurposed in case of humans, for though the same thing was used for something completely different for other animals and so on. And then we moved on to the cultural evolution theory as to how factors like learnability and ease of transmission, so on and so forth, are also important factors with respect to learning language. So, in order for language to qualify for transmission across generations, we need it to be learnable as well as it should be transferable. So, there we discussed about certain experiments using artificial agents. Primarily we discussed about Professor Simon Kirby's work in that, and then we also discussed gestural theory, gestural hypothesis and vocal theory. So, with that we concluded module 1. So, in a nutshell, module 1 was all about evolution of language and various theories and some studies and their findings. Module 2 we have discussed about the theories of language acquisition. Now, language acquisition is a domain where there are multiple theoretical positions that have contributed from time to time. Starting with the behaviorism, we discussed about the main proponents of behaviorism, main theorists and their ideas that were put forward, which later on were utilized in the domain. So, we discussed them, and then also we discussed nativism or the generativist theory of Chomsky, the innateness hypothesis and what are the primary tenets of innateness hypothesis, and then of course, we discussed constructivism, and similarly the scholars and their contribution and the main tenets. So, this is how we did the second module. Third module onward, we discuss the actual properties of language. So, structural properties of language and their acquisition we started discussing from module 3 onward. So, module 3 was dedicated to the acquisition of phonology, how children learn the sounds of their language, what are the specific properties that they learn, what are those properties that they probably learn before they are born, meaning in the fetal stage. So, in the prenatal stage also children are exposed to language, primarily in the mother's language and other ambient languages, and what is the impact of that prenatal experience on their neonatal, or let us say immediately after their birth, how do they perform on language related tasks, primarily in the domain of sound. So, recognizing sounds or not recognizing them. So, starting with that, we discussed about various theories here as well as, and also we discussed a number of findings. So, theories and how they developed and what are the findings, how much of data support the theories and how much they do not. And for each module from now onward, we have looked at the major findings, the major scholars and their work, as well as the main findings from all the perspectives, the theoretical perspective that we discussed in module 2. We have brought it in again and again in each module, so that we try to see the same pattern of language acquisition, in this case phonological acquisition, and we try to see how nativist as well as constructivist theories try to make sense, or what is their take on the process that we see among children. And we have compared and contrasted them as to which are the properties that nativists seem to have a better explanation for, or whether it is the constructivists who have explained it better and whatever. So, we have discussed both sides of the story, keeping the structural properties in the middle. So, these are the properties. So, whether the children learn, children are already born with a capability of understanding all the languages, all the sounds in all the languages or not, what are the changes that they might go through, so on and so forth. So, that is how the third module was discussed. So, basically it was primarily we can say that all the major theories and the major findings have been discussed in this module. Module 4, we have started discussing with the morphology. So, after phonology is in place, so phonology is the very basic about a language. So, what are the sounds that are relevant sounds for a particular language? That is where phonology comes in. So, if my language does not have a sound, is the child who is born into our language family, language group, or in our community capable of understanding those differences in sound system, or are they also capable of learning the other distinctions, other binary oppositions in other language that is not their mother tongue. So, once that part is in place, once the child understands that these are the sounds, this is how sounds are segmented, syllable structures are segmented and so on, then they can move on to, or that is what we think, that we can now talk about morphology. Morphology is all about how words are created. So, how do you form plural form for that matter, or how do you form progressive tense in English language. So, these are certain things that we talked about, and of course, again the same behaviorism, nativism and constructivism were brought in. We looked at the data, we looked at the findings from the different groups of researchers and tried to understand them both with the nativist theories as well as with the constructivist theories, and tried to broad overview about how things are as of today. Of course, not all data are satisfactorily answered by any particular theory. We need to look at it with a more of a critical lens, but then this was also discussed at length in module 4. And also because many of the theories in the initial stages had data from mostly Western European languages, but now we have a wealth of data. So, we have tried to see some of those properties of morphological development by using the findings from other languages as well. That was module 4. Module 5, we are so now our sounds and word formation processes are in place. Now is the time to learn language. So, now the process was to gradual next step was the step to learn words. So, this section as a result discussed the word acquisition by talking about by citing main theories and findings. What are the main theories of word acquisition? Like we have followed. So, this has been the pattern starting from module 3. We have talked about the same, the trajectory has been similar. So, we talk about the problems that are there, what the data says, and then which theory explains it better. So, we have discussed both theories, both the positive and the negative cases, the negative as in where the theory does not seem to explain the findings. So, both similarly for this module as well. And so, word formation, word learning, how children overcome certain problems of overgeneralization, how do they understand what is how do they understand, how do they learn verbs, how do they learn nouns and so on. And then the next segment, that is module 6, was dedicated entirely to the acquisition of syntax. So, here again we discussed the main ideas, main theories. Again this is a very syntax, acquisition of syntax is a rather rich domain. A lot of literature is available, lot of studies are available. A number of stalwarts have worked on this, the number of scholars have their own findings, their own way of approaching the question. Of course, we could not cover everything in one module, but we have tried to give you a brief overview about what is the overall understanding of the scholars with respect to how children acquire their sentence structure, how syntax is acquired is what we have tried to cover in this module 6. Module 7 and 8, we have taken you to the domain of bilingual language acquisition. So, till module 6, we looked at phonology, morphology, word and syntax. So, basically we have taken care of the fundamental aspects of language, and that was in the domain of first language acquisition, which is something that happens normally, naturally, that is not taught. And after that, we have put in place what are the trajectories of development for first language acquisition. We moved on to learning the second language. Now, here we have dedicated 2 modules for that, because this is also another domain which has been studied a lot of important data is available, there is a contribution of really great scholars in that. We have tried again to give you the basic idea about what those things are, what are those main findings. So, we looked at childhood bilingualism, we looked at adult bilingualism, and within childhood also we have looked at childhood simultaneous bilingualism, as well as we have discussed successive bilingualism in children. So, only successive bilingualism will actually qualify to be called second language acquisition, because when children learn two languages at the same time, which is technically called simultaneous bilingualism, there is no first and second language, both languages are considered first language in that case. However, because that is also a possibility, that also happens, this is also a reality for many children. We did discuss that, because they are learning two languages, not one language. So, we discussed a little bit about that, and what are the primary findings, what are the controversies, what are the theories that try to make sense of for simultaneous bilingualism in children, that we covered. After that, we discussed SLA in children, SLA as in second language acquisition for children. So, what happens when a child learns his second language after the first language, that is typically after 3 years of age. There are those debates on that, which we have discussed in the module. So, childhood bilingualism, what are the properties, what are the main factors that are responsible for them to attain what is called ultimate attainment, that is the best possible proficiency that they can achieve, that we have discussed. After that, we looked at adult bilingualism. Adult bilingualism as in when you learn your second language in adulthood, not when you are young. And the factors remain similar, though not same, and the same factors affect children and adults differently. So, we have looked at all those main factors like input, age, then interaction, all of those factors we have discussed with respect to referring to the scholars, we have worked on them. When it comes to adult SLA, we have also discussed certain other psychological factors like motivation, attitude. These also are important factor and also responsible for whether you will your proficiency level will be, or whatever your ultimate attainment level will be. So, these two modules talked entirely about bilingualism, that is learning a second language in childhood, simultaneously, successively, and in adulthood, with respect to various parameters of parameters that can have an impact on the way it is learned. Not only that, we have also discussed something some other kinds of language learning which are similar, though not exactly same, but comparable domains of learning another language, which is we talked about third language learning, we talked about heritage language learning. Heritage language acquisition is a we can call it kind of a recent, much more recent than second language acquisition research. So, heritage language research is a new domain comparatively, and what are the parameters that are studied there, how is it comparable to the second language acquisition, we have discussed that as well. Not only that, we have also talked about various language teaching methods, like for example, immersion method or CLIL method of teaching a second language, and how the scenario in the in this domain is. So, there have been many changes in when we are talking about second language learning, automatically we have to talk about language teaching as well. This is not relevant for first language, but this is relevant for second language. So, we did discuss about the socially learned versus the tutored second language acquisition. So, when it is a tutored second language acquisition, meaning you will learn your second language in a classroom setting, that is where the entire domain of second language teaching comes in. So, what are those methods? What were the older methods of teaching second language? Because this is not exactly a part of the course, this is, but we cannot avoid it. So, I have discussed this in brief while discussing the second language at ultimate attainment. So, what are those parameters? What are those factors that are responsible for learning the second language well? And then we have discussed, in light of that, we have discussed how these parameters have been taken care of by various teaching methodologies, and within that we have discussed the CLIL immersion and so on. This is another way, another entire domain of research, but we touched upon it a little bit. We have also discussed the effect of bilingualism on the human mind, again very briefly. After all these, we have we move to the module 9. Module 9 talked about. So, in the language acquisition research domain, the main debate is about nature and nurture, nature versus nurture. So, how much of the knowledge is genetically coded is that is part of our nature part of the debate. Nurture on the other hand talks about whether there is anything in the environment or in your in your surrounding, or there is something that you can learn rather than express what is already innately provided. That is where we brought in this module. This module looked at the role of nurture, as in the role of epigenetics. So, the various things we have discussed in this in terms of various theoretical position, again how much the ambient environment impacts the way you learn or any new language. So, in this regard also we discussed cross cultural data, because this is very important, because the different languages have different kinds of conceptualization process and different kinds of social realization of those conceptual processes. So, naturally there will be some amount of interaction, and hence we discussed that. This is a domain again very rich, but we have given you a brief overview. Module 10, this talks about the how communication as a final goal, because till now we are looking at language learning. So, sound system, the morphology, the word, syntax, and then we took it all the way to second language acquisition. So, after all of this is done, what will you do with that knowledge? So, you will use it, right. So, that is what we need to discuss next. That is what we did in module 10. So, we looked at how the basic rules of communication, how the child learns the rules of communication, how they converse, how do they learn to converse in a meaningful way, and they can contribute to an ongoing conversation in a proper way. So, there we have discussed this module discusses conversation rules, primarily referring to Grice and his maxims. So, how children learn to contribute in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, in terms of relevance, and so on. And then what happens when the rules are violated? For example, when you use a metaphor or use irony, do children understand them? How do they understand them? What is the trajectory of development of their understanding? All of these we have tried to cover in module 10, which is entirely focused on communication, learning to communicate. So, but the main finding in this domain is that even though the structural properties of language are learned pretty quickly by children, but communication, learning to communicate takes a little longer. They actually do not master it in their childhood. Even though learning to speak, even syntax they master pretty early in life, but communication which is where we also bring in pragmatics. So, communication has two different parts to it. Not only you have to use the grammatically correct form of the language, but also you need to keep in mind, the person who speaks needs to keep in mind the cultural norms. So, what are the rules of conversation from linguistic perspective, and what are the rules of conversation from a cultural perspective? What is appropriate in a given scenario is also important. So, children need to master both of these things, both of these properties. So, this is where our communicative competence or pragmatics comes in, and that is what we have discussed in module 10. And the take home lesson from this module is that children do take some time, even though it seems that they are able to understand the nitty-gritty, the nuances of communication at an early age, but for it takes some little bit of more time for them to master it. So, it is not only about knowing, but also being able to utilize it properly. That is what is important for us, and we have found that it takes some time. Okay, after that in module 11, we have till now we have looked at both the structure of the language and the rules of communication and so on. Then module 11 talks about the role of the human brain. So, how we have looked at various things within this module. We have looked at the structural pattern of the brain, as in the development of the structure of the brain in the childhood, while the language development is also going on. So, simultaneous development of the brain and the language both have been discussed here, and also we have talked about which part of the brain is responsible for processing what kind of linguistic input or output for that matter. So, language is processed in the brain. So, is there a difference between first language and second language processing in terms of functional lateralization, as in the localization of the process in a brain? That has been also discussed. Within this domain, we have also talked about the concept of ecological brain. Ecological brain refers to the simple fact that when the child is born, the brain is not entirely formed, entirely structured properly. So, the human brain continues to grow after birth. So, while the brain continues to grow, which has a meaning in structural terms, as in the number of pathways that are created, or the extra connections are reduced, there is a pruning that happens. While all of these things are going on, the child is also experiencing the real world, the world that surrounds the child, and the child is also learning language. So, what are the interactions between the language development and the brain development? That has been discussed to some extent in this module, and also as I just said that the localization, the functional localization of processing for both L1 and L2 in terms of age, in terms of input and other things have been also discussed. So, specific role of different brain region in the language functions have been discussed. And then the last module, in the last module, that is module 12, which is the module we are in now. This is where we talked about the language acquisition among the atypical population. So far, starting from module 1 till module 12, all that we have discussed pertains to the normally developing children, typically developing children. This is what will happen if the child is developing as they should. But we also know that there are children who have different kinds of language delays and language disorder and so on. So, what happens is the language development, the trajectory different for them, what are the properties that we see, and also a connected question that automatically comes in this module is that whether language development and brain development, that is cognitive development, always go hand in hand. Is it possible for somebody to have a language impairment and not have cognitive impairment, and the other way? So, we have tried to discuss one or two examples from each of the types. So, for example, we discussed SLI, specific language impairment, where the impairment affects only language, but not cognitive abilities. And similarly, we also discussed about Williams syndrome, where cognitive abilities are disturbed, language ability seems to be pretty well. And then we also discussed about autism spectrum disorder, where both language as well as cognitive development have been disturbed or delayed. So, these are the areas that we have discussed. So, we discussed both cases where language disorder co-occurs with mental disorder as well as when they do not. So, we complete this module with a discussion of the latest intervention as well. For example, some of the latest findings with respect to the oxygen therapy, with respect to using educational robots, social robots and so on, and social games, serious games, various kinds of latest techniques that have been that are now getting used as an intervention method alongside the traditional therapies, that also we have touched upon. So, this is where we end this module. So, this is so it brings us to the end. I hope that I have been able to give you a brief overview. This is a vast field, as I stated in the very beginning of the course. Language acquisition, child language acquisition is an enormous domain of study, and the aim of this course was to give you a good outline of the fundamental aspects of the discipline, and so thereby that is how the course was designed. And for every topic where there are many more possible readings, I have given adequate reference. So, anybody who is interested in reading the original papers, original books, original references, you are welcome to do so, because I have given a long list of reference for each module. I hope you will be able to benefit from that as well. So, that is what brings us to the end. Thank you so much for your attention. I sign off.
you.